Hi and welcome to the video. Today I want to talk about the EE1 Dot-Sight from Olympus. And before you click the video away because you're not shooting with Olympus, that doesn't matter at all. It's compatible with basically all cameras. It just goes on the hot shoe of your camera. You can tighten it down and then it's already installed. This Dot-Sight basically projects a small red dot there, a small LED that basically helps you to track a bird in flight, something I'm sure we have all struggled with in the past. And many people already wrote me that they were happy with it, and I was a bit skeptical if it's really worth the money. So I had now the opportunity to test it with several cameras and most importantly with several lenses. And in this video I want to show you how you can configure it, how you install it, how to use it, and what are my experiences, advantages and disadvantages, and whether I think it's worth the investment or if you should rather spend the money somewhere else. So basically the idea when working with the Dot-Sight is that you don't look through the viewfinder anymore, you just have this small red dot and then basically track a bird like this. And the advantage is that you have a wider angle of view, because if you look through the viewfinder combined with a telephoto lens, the field of view or like the angle is very small, which makes it hard to follow the bird. So I will show you now how to install it, because for the installation you need a tripod. Afterwards it's fine without, or I actually prefer or recommend to not use a tripod with the Dot-Sight. However, for installation I put it here on my tripod. And what I then do basically is just I open the Dot-Sight here. I can turn it on. It has like 5 different levels of brightness. For me, I found that usually level 3 or 4 is enough, but on the other hand, I think it's not using so much electricity, so pumping it up to 5 on a bright outdoor day might also be a nice option. The next thing you need to do is the calibration. This is not only camera, but more lens dependent actually. So we need to calibrate that the red dot actually shows or points at where the middle of the frame is. So for the calibration, you just basically need to find something that's kind of easy to point at. So I have a panel like I would say 25-30 meters away from me that has a small number 10 in the upper right corner. So what I will do is I will now look through the viewfinder or the display of the camera, and I will center my autofocus point and select a small autofocus point or field, and then arrange the camera on the tripod in a way that the center of the camera is pointing to this 10. Then I will lock down the tripod. And now I need to calibrate the Dot-Sight that it's also pointing at this 10. So I go a bit behind, look through it. And at the moment I see that it's a bit more to the right. So I can use the thing here on the left, the small wheel to kind of put it more to the left. And then with the right wheel on the right hand side I can put it a bit higher, because at the moment it's pointing too low. And now I'm good, I'm at this 10. I will do a check through the viewfinder. Yes, it still matches. So now the calibration is done and I can take the camera off the tripod and basically start shooting. So I mentioned before, you spot a bird, you go like this and you follow the bird. Easy. It definitely has some advantages. For example, you see the whole surrounding, and this makes it easier to locate the bird, follow the bird, also see what's happening around. So that's definitely an advantage. Another advantage is with cameras that show this kind of blackout when shooting, or a slideshow effect in the continuous shooting mode. And that's basically all cameras that don't have a stacked sensor or a global shutter. Yeah, you have this lag which sometimes makes it a bit hard to follow the bird in flight. And here the Dot-Sight has a clear advantage, because like an optical viewfinder, you see what's really happening. You don't have a digital frame that might lag a bit behind. So that's definitely 2 advantages. However, there are also some disadvantages that I found when using it. The first one is it's not always easy to hold the camera properly to directly see the dot. So actually it happened to me a couple of times that I was holding it and I needed to readjust my head a bit because I was not looking straight through it. I felt it in general. After using it for a bit longer time, I got used to this, but you really need to have it precise, because otherwise you might see the dot, but it might be in the upper left corner or the lower right corner. And this means that actually you track the wrong thing. You put the bird in the wrong place, and you might end up with cut wings, which is exactly why you bought this thing in the first place. The next thing I would not underestimate is the size that it has. So usually your camera will not fit in your backpack anymore. Even if you close it, often it doesn't fit anymore, so you need to take it off, which for me is just a bit cumbersome and annoying. And actually it happened to me once or twice that I wanted to grab the camera. I didn't look in the backpack and I almost grabbed it here, which I guess is not really the best thing to do. Another disadvantage is obviously that you don't have an idea about how big the bird will actually be in the frame. And that's also not very easy. Obviously it's easier in this sense if you use a prime lens, because with a prime lens at least you know that you have always the same focal length. If you have a zoom lens, it's much worse, because depending on if you're at, let's say, 200 or 400 millimeter, the bird will be much bigger or smaller in frame, and you have no clue if you just use the Dot-Sight. Then another thing that I really didn't like is you have no control over the autofocus. So basically you point, you shoot, and you just pray that the autofocus kind of focused on the bird, that it detects the bird, because once it goes on the background, from my experiences with all mirrorless camera tested, once it's stuck on the background, it will not magically and automatically detect the bird. This is very rare. And when I use the viewfinder, I usually look, and if I see it stuck on the background, I just quickly turn here the focusing ring and bring it closer, and then it usually grabs it. And that's just something you cannot do if you use the Dot-Sight. Another part that is kind of related is the exposure. So of course you can say you will set the exposure first, but what if the light changes? Like, let's assume it's evening and you have some trees that cast some shadow and you're following a bird that is moving between sun and shadow. Well, you need to adjust the exposure, and I can do this even when tracking a bird in flight. At least by a stop or so is quite easy, and that's not possible if you have this Dot-Sight again. And even if you don't use manual mode, but let's say manual mode with auto ISO, depending if the background change, you would also need to change the exposure compensation. Again, this is not working with a Dot-Sight. If you want to get a bit more creative in terms of composition, here you're also limited, because by design you kind of need to put the animal in the center of the frame. And if you want to put it more on one side or in the corner, you cannot do this. I need to say I don't do this so often for birds in flight, but sometimes when I have a bird that is starting from the water, I would like to do it. Birds starting from the water is another scenario where this actually doesn't work so well, because often I want to get really low. I put the tripod into the water with the camera on it, and I cannot get so low, so I need to look to basically take pictures over the flipped out monitor. And obviously as soon as you're not on eye level with the camera anymore, you cannot use the Dot-Sight. So for these situations I also need to use the screen. Another thing to consider is that it's not so easy and fast, I think, to follow a bird like this. It's much quicker if you have the camera at the eye and you can just turn your body. You're very quick, and it's hard to describe, but because of the long arms you have, somehow this takes just a bit more time than turning quickly like this. And especially if you have heavier and longer lenses, it's also getting a bit tired. I mean, I would not like to shoot like this with my 600mm f4 for even a minute. Now I already kind of mentioned big lenses, but for big lenses it works less good, because if the lens is too high, basically it blocks the Dot-Sight and it doesn't work anymore. So overall it worked quite well. I was actually surprised. I thought it would be worse, but there were still quite some disadvantages that for me doesn't make it worth using it. I prefer to shoot without it, for the reason I mentioned before. If you want to buy it, I put a link in the video description, but I would think if I would not spend this money elsewhere, maybe a nice photo workshop, a small photography trip, or something like this, and I would just try to exercise how you spot birds, because I see that many people kind of do this wrong. They say, I cannot find the bird now in my viewfinder, it's the frame is too narrow, and I think this is exactly the issue. You should not take the camera and then start looking for the bird. You look for the bird, and then you take your camera and you point it directly at the bird, and you are already at the bird. And this is something you can very easily train at home. You don't need birds. You can just like train on a static subject to just spot it immediately, look through the viewfinder, see if it works. You can do the same just outside on your balcony in the garden with cars, bicycles, planes passing by, whatever. So I hope this video was helpful for you. If yes, I would be very happy if you leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and see you in the next video.